just a body pushing against its own design, a skull pressing against bone, and the thin membrane between two lives and one death. For most of human existence, childbirth was the single most lethal routine event a person could endure. And yet here you are, which means someone, somewhere in a cave or a grassy hollow or a firelit shelter, figured out how to make it work. We tend to think of ancient survival in terms of hunting predators, enduring ice ages, or crossing oceans. But the quieter catastrophe, the one that played out not on open savannas, but in the intimate, agonizing dark of shelters and gathering places, was the simple act of bringing a new human into existence. This is not just a story about pain. This is a story about a paradox built into your skeleton. A paradox that shaped your brain, your childhood, your communities, and quite possibly the origin of human compassion itself. The reason childbirth nearly kills us is the same reason we became the most intelligent species this planet has ever produced. And the way ancient humans solved that problem tells us something profound about who we really are. Here is the paradox. About 6 million years ago, your ancestors stood upright, walking on two legs, reshaped the pelvis entirely, narrowing the birth canal into a tight, rigid passage optimized for locomotion rather than reproduction. At the same time, over the last 2 million years, hominin brains exploded in size. Homo erectus had a brain roughly twice the volume of Australopithecus. By the time Homo sapiens appeared around 300,000 years ago, cranial capacity had tripled from those early bipeds. You now have an enormous head that must pass through a canal designed for walking, not for delivering that head. In 1960, the physical anthropologist Sherwood Washburn named this conflict the obstetric dilemma, and for decades it was the dominant explanation for why human birth is so uniquely difficult and dangerous compared to other primates. A chimpanzee delivers an infant whose skull passes through the birth canal with relative ease, with centimeters to spare. In humans, the fit is so tight that the baby must rotate, not once but multiple times, corkscrewing through the pelvic outlet in a complex sequence that no other primate requires. This rotational birth was studied extensively by Karen Rosenberg of the University of Delaware and Wenda Trevathan of New Mexico State University. Their research, published across several landmark papers from the 1990s onward, demonstrated something remarkable. Because the human infant emerges facing away from the mother, unlike in other great apes where the baby faces toward the mother and can be guided out, human mothers are physically disadvantaged in assisting their own delivery. The baby comes out facing the wrong direction. Pulling it forward risks spinal injury. This single anatomical fact, Rosenberg and Trevathan argued, means that humans evolved as obligate midwifery species. We did not develop assisted birth as a cultural luxury. We needed it. Assistance during delivery was not optional. It was survival. But the obstetric dilemma itself has been challenged. In 2012, Holly Dunsworth of the University of Rhode Island and her colleagues published a study proposing the energetics of gestation and growth hypothesis. They argued that the reason human babies are born when they are, seemingly premature compared to other primates, is not simply because the head cannot grow any larger and still fit through the pelvis. Instead, they pointed to metabolic limits. A human mother near the end of gestation is running at nearly the maximum sustained metabolic rate her body can maintain. The baby is born not because it has outgrown the pelvis, but because the mother's metabolism has reached its ceiling. She simply cannot fuel both herself and the fetus any longer. This reframing does not eliminate the danger of the tight fit. It adds another layer. Your ancestors faced not only a mechanical problem, but an energetic one. The mother was exhausted at the very moment she needed the most strength. Further evidence comes from our closest evolutionary cousins, the Tabun C1 skeleton, A Neanderthal woman discovered in Mount Carmel, Israel, provided one of the earliest reconstructions of a Neanderthal pelvis. Analysis by Timothy Weaver and Jean-Jacques Hublin suggested that Neanderthal birth was also constrained, though the shape of the canal differed slightly from modern humans, being wider from side to side at certain points. The Kebera II pelvis, another Neanderthal specimen from Israel, confirmed that even our robust cousins dealt with a tight birth canal relative to infant skull size. They too must have faced difficult, dangerous deliveries. They too likely needed help. This is where the story shifts from anatomy to something deeper. In 2015, Anna Warner of Harvard University published research showing that wider hips do not actually increase the metabolic cost of walking or running in women, challenging one of the core assumptions of the obstetric dilemma. If wider hips do not make locomotion less efficient, then why did the pelvis not simply evolve to be wider and make birth easier? The answer may be more complex than a simple trade-off. It may involve developmental constraints, the timing of pelvic growth relative to hormones, and the deep architecture of how bone responds to mechanical loading during adolescence. What this tells us is that the danger of human childbirth is not one simple evolutionary mistake. It is a deep, tangled inheritance with no clean solution. Your ancestors could not simply evolve their way out of it. They had to find another way. Now picture this. It is 70,000 years ago, somewhere in what is now southern Africa, near a river whose name will not exist for another 69,000 years. The dry season has stretched the days into endless amber light, and the grass is brittle and pale. Inside a shallow rock overhang, a fire crackles against the coming darkness. A woman is on her hands and knees, her breath ragged, her fingers gripping the packed earth beneath her. She has been in labor for hours. The pain comes in waves that obliterate thought. Around her, 3 other women kneel close. One presses her hands against the laboring woman's lower back. Another murmurs low, steady sounds. Not words exactly, but a rhythm, a cadence that says, "I am here, I am here, keep going." The third woman has her hands ready, positioned, waiting. They have done this before, not for this woman, but for others. They know the moment the shoulders clear. They know how to ease the cord. They know the silence that means danger and the cry that means life. Somewhere beyond the overhang, a hyena calls and is ignored. The world outside does not matter. Nothing matters except this passage, this impossible negotiation between bone and bone, between life and death, between a species that chose to think and a body that pays the price. She screams. And then there is another sound. What happened in that shelter was not merely biological. It was the architecture of human society being built. Sarah Hrdy, the anthropologist and primatologist at the University of California, Davis, spent decades arguing that cooperative breeding, the practice of individuals other than the biological mother helping to raise offspring, was central to human evolution. Her work, particularly in her book Mothers and Others, published in 2009, makes the case that our species became fundamentally cooperative, not through hunting or warfare, but through the shared labor of keeping infants alive. And that cooperation begins at birth itself. The midwife, the helper, the grandmother, the sister kneeling beside the laboring mother in the firelight. These are not peripheral figures. They may be the reason Homo sapiens succeeded where other large-brained hominins did not. Consider what this means. The difficulty of human childbirth may have been one of the most powerful selective pressures for social bonding, communication, and trust. You cannot assist someone through a dangerous delivery if you cannot coordinate. You cannot coordinate without communication. You cannot sustain these relationships without trust, memory, reciprocity, and the cognitive architecture that underlies all of them. The obstetric crisis did not just threaten our species, it may have forged the very qualities that define us: language, empathy, community, the instinct to help someone in pain. These are not incidental features of humanity. They may be direct evolutionary responses to the fact that our mothers could not do this alone. And there is one more dimension to consider. Human infants are born, as the biologist Adolf Portman described in the mid-20th century, as secondary altricial creatures. Compared to other primates, our newborns are profoundly helpless. A baby horse stands within hours. A baby chimpanzee clings to its mother immediately. A human infant cannot hold up its own head. It will not walk for a year. Its brain, at birth, is only about 25% of its adult size, compared to roughly 40% in chimpanzees. This means the majority of human brain development happens outside the womb, in the social world, shaped by voices and faces and touch. This extended helplessness is not a flaw. It is the solution. Because the baby must be born before it is finished, it completes its development in culture rather than in the body. Your intelligence, your capacity for language, your ability to absorb the infinite complexity of human social life, all of it depends on the fact that you were born too soon. And you were born too soon because your mother's body could sustain you no longer, because your skull could grow no larger and still pass through her bones, because 6 million years ago, an ancestor stood up and changed the geometry of everything. This is the inheritance written in your pelvis and your skull, and the neurons that fire when you hear an infant cry and feel the pull to help. Every hospital ward, every midwife's hand, every partner gripping a laboring mother's fingers in the fluorescent glow of a modern delivery room is the latest echo of a solution invented in firelight by women whose names were never recorded but whose wisdom kept our species from extinction. Childbirth did not get easier. Over 100,000 generations, we got better at facing it together. The pelvis did not widen. The community did. Every single one of your ancestors survived childbirth, not because their bodies were designed for it. Their bodies were designed against it. They survived because someone knelt beside them in the dark, spoke low, pressed steady hands against the place where it hurt, and refused to let them face it alone. That is the oldest human technology. Older than fire, older than blades, older than language itself. Presence. The simple, radical act of showing up when the passage is narrow and the outcome is uncertain. You exist because of it, millions of times over. In shelters and hollows and places the earth has long since swallowed, someone chose to stay. And the child breathed, and the line continued, all the way to you.